I'm a PhD student at the History Department at USF, University of South Florida, and basically we've partnered with the Do the Local Motion program for the Tampa Downtown Partnership to create history-themed walking tours that we're going to be providing all month. I was one of the students that wrote today's tour, which is of Tampa's Illicit past.
Why do you think that it's important? Some people, whether it's for religious reasons or for a pristine background, what reason do you think people have for having this allure to the illicit past, and what do you think is important to keep it alive?
The history of Tampa is a really good way to bring people together to learn about their history, the history of their city, of the places that they live, and it gives them more of an idea of their identity as Tampans today. Today's tour will be focusing mainly on the 20s and 30s as a really important time in Tampan history where these criminal organizations really took over and cemented their existence in the city. Alcohol, drugs, gambling, prostitution, all of these things operated really openly in Tampa Bay. And today's tour is sort of describing what the conditions were that allowed crime to flourish in the city, why was it so open, why wasn't it policed, and also to give you an idea of how integral it was to Tampan politics, to Tampan society, to Tampan culture. A Jacksonville newspaper in 1912 basically called Tampa the most wicked city in the United States. So hopefully this tour should give you a really good glimpse of that, and it should be fun. Often it's forgotten that these communities are ethnic enclaves, they're culturally isolated, many of them don't speak English, and so it's forgotten that they often don't have protection from police or municipal services in many ways. The government sometimes ignores them, and so it's very important that if you want to be king of Tampa Bay, you have to work your way into the local immigrant communities and basically gain their support and their trust. And so Tampa's version of Al Capone, of John Gotti, in the 1920s and 30s was Charlie Wall. He was a very charismatic figure, and that's who we're going to be focusing on today on our tour. And we have a fan. All right, excellent. He was the son of two of Tampa's prominent families. His father was a prominent Tampa physician and one-time mayor. His mother was the daughter of one of our founding families. He was born into a privileged world. It was thought he would have a brilliant political career. He was a mathematical genius. He could have been one of Tampa's most wonderful public figures had he so chosen. Instead, he chose to rule Tampa Bay in a different light. He was the king, undisputed, of Tampa's criminal underworld for roughly 3 decades. Wall built his criminal enterprise by taking advantage of both the needs of local immigrant communities, mainly in Ybor City and West Tampa, and from using his family and political connections with Tampa's business and political elites. So, our first stop on today's tour, if you're ready to follow me, is over to the old City Hall. Sort of gives us a spot to get away from the traffic. So can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, excellent. So if you'll notice, across the street is Tampa's old City Hall, and I actually have a photo that I'd like to pass out here, which shows the old City Hall building in the background and the police department and jailhouse annex, which is no longer standing. It's actually where that parking lot is right now. The building was built in 1915. It housed local government, the mayor's office, and like I said, the annex had the police department and the jailhouse. The old historic courthouse was right across the street. Doing funny things to me under here for some reason. And it's important on today's tour not only because of the police department, but mainly the important role that corruption played in Tampa politics, allowing the criminal underworld to really flourish. Corruption is always an issue in local city politics, but in Tampa, literally, it was how things got done. You could not get elected in this city without the help of Charlie Wall. Charlie Wall really sort of set the scene for corruption in Tampa Bay and for the ability of the organized criminal Traficante families and various gangs that came after him to keep taxes in Tampa. Thank you. And how did he manage this? Basically, the story goes, in 1910, Charlie Wall funneled money from his criminal enterprises to support the families of a strike of the cigar city manufacturers in Ybor City. Over 900 families were kept going during this strike by Charlie Wall, who gave them food, who gave them money, who helped pay medical bills. And basically, even though the strike proved unsuccessful, the Ybor City Cuban community labeled him a local hero. And so he didn't exactly do this because he was just the most generous man on earth. Basically, he knew that the Latin vote was a significant voting bloc in Tampa politics. He knew that he could garner local support through helping with this strike, and then turn around and tell politicians, judges, police, that you need to leave my criminal organizations and criminal businesses alone, and I will make sure that you can get elected. I will keep these votes going for you. And so basically, he began a relationship between politicians who wanted to get elected, that they needed to secure his blessing. If he couldn't buy the votes he needed, he simply had the ballot boxes stuffed. His supporters would go again and again and again to vote for the candidates that he backed. And it was the corruption and voting fraud in this town was so bad that contemporaries of Wall basically said that there was not a single honest election in Tampa Bay or Hillsborough County for all of the decades that he was in power. So it was a huge, big deal. But it's also an example of this sort of symbiotic relationship that the crime organizations develop with these immigrant communities. They are able to provide charitable services, protective services to garner local support, which protects them and shields their businesses. Wall aided these 900 families during this strike. He made large donations to local churches. He protected them from police, from petty criminals, from rival gangs, and it developed his untouchable celebrity in the city. He would walk around in his white linen suit and straw hat, or be chauffeured in his Cadillac, and everybody knew that he was king of Tampa Bay. So, without further ado, our next stop is the Federal Courthouse, which is right down here. So as you can see, this is the old Federal Courthouse. It was built in 1904, and it housed a post office and customs office. Customs being very important because Tampa was an extremely huge area for smuggling and the illegal importation of all kinds of naughty things at this time period. Tampa was the perfect ideal location for smuggling with its natural harbor, numerous small inlets. In the late 19th and early 20th century, it was the importation of illegal aliens, first the Chinese, and after that, Southern Europeans. In the Prohibition era, of course, it was alcohol, and throughout the 20th century, it was narcotics, especially in Tampa, morphine and cocaine, which were big problems in the city throughout these decades. As recently as 1983, here I was born, 70 to 80% of illegal narcotics that were imported into the U.S. came through Florida. Now, obviously, Miami has become the big spot for smuggling, but up until that point, which is a fairly recent switch, Tampa was always a real hub of the illegal importation of contraband. During Prohibition, the Department of the Treasury was charged with enforcing the Volstead Act, which, as we all know, made most alcohol consumption illegal in the United States. Agents were housed in this building and tried rather unsuccessfully to enforce Prohibition in Tampa. As we all know, Prohibition was difficult to enforce nationally, and in Tampa, and there are several reasons for this. Number one, Congress never really funded the war on liquor. The agents were not qualified and were often corrupt because they weren't very well paid. They had long hours and few benefits, which disqualified certain applicants from wanting the job. And also, it was a huge drain on the court system. Frustrated, overworked judges tended to become excessively lenient. They restricted what kind of evidence could be brought into trial. They often handed down, ridiculously lenient sentences. Fines as low as $5 or $10 were pretty customary, and often no jail sentences were ever handed out, even to those who were repeated offenders. Basically, they would get caught, they would smile as the police put the handcuffs in, they would pay their measly fine, which was dropped in the bucket for the profits that they were making, and then they'd walk out the door and their business would start again in hours. Some fun facts about the local version of this story. Tampa's police department in 1927 had only 30 patrolmen for 150,000 citizens. So it left huge sections of coastline, near Tampa Bay, and farmland on record. They were also paid about $75 a month. In comparison, you can imagine, many city officials were paid as much as $50 a week. So $75 a month was pretty easily for the type of work that they were doing. So it opened them to the possibilities of corruption. The Federal Courthouse also hosted the notorious Kefauver Crime Commission in the early 50s. Senator Estes Kefauver created his Organized Crime Committee, which traveled around the country, going to large cities, subpoenaing mobsters and bringing them in and asking them all kinds of questions about the criminal organizations in their city. Understandably, most of them had extremely short memories all of a sudden. But when the Kefauver Crime Commission came to Tampa, Charlie Wall actually came out of retirement briefly and sang to the jury. Basically, he told them all about how corrupt Tampa's political structure really was, how he managed to run all of his illegal businesses, how he survived his many assassination attempts. When asked why he thought he was able to get away with all of this, why he was still alive, basically he said, the devil looks after his own. All right, so our next stop is the Hotel Floridan, which is just down the street. Now, I was hoping we'd be able to actually get inside of the Sapphire Room, but to be honest, we're running a little short on time. So I do have a picture that I'd like to pass around, which is the Sapphire Room of the Floridan Hotel. This picture is from 1905, but it was much the same in the 30s. The Sapphire Room is one of the few still standing locations where Charlie Wall took some of his deals with local Tampa officials. But the really important thing to understand about Charlie Wall's criminal underworld and how he was able to bankroll his power is basically Bolita. Bolita was a huge gambling game in Tampa. It was much like our lottery in many ways. Basically, the way it was played is 100 small consecutive balls, and Bolita in Spanish means little balls, were put into a velvet sack, tied and tossed from one person to the next. The last person to catch the sack, the catcher, would grab a ball through the sack, that would be cut away, and that would be the winning ball. And in the 20s, a winning number on Bolita could have an 85 to 1 payout. So you could spend a nickel to get a ticket and win $4. It was a big deal. Basically, gambling in Bolita bankrolled all of Charlie Wall's other organizations. His disorderly or prostitution houses, his bootlegging liquor operations were all cited. It was all about Bolita. On a good night, Wall's Bolita parlors could bring in up to $57,000, even in that time period. And he'd go home with roughly half of it. To ensure wins, the Bolita games were often rigged. Dealers would fill balls with lead so they would sink to the bottom of the bag, or they would freeze the ball so the catcher could find it through the bag, making sure that a highly wagered number didn't win, that the house pretty much kept on top of things. It's thought that Tampa's business elite may have funded Charlie Wall's takeover of the Bolita racket. Originally, all of these games were played in Cuba, and there was a huge courier service that would bring news of the nightly throwing to Tampa and carry money to and fro. However, a lot of the money in Tampa was going overseas to Cuba, and so it's thought that perhaps business elites helped Charlie Wall to take over and start running games here in Tampa to keep all of those profits local. Basically, the thing that makes Bolita such an interesting part of Tampa culture is that everyone played. The white elite community played, the middle class played, the Cuban and Latin immigrants played, men and women played, the African Americans played. Everybody played it at one point in time or another. There were very few places in Tampa Bay that you couldn't buy a Bolita ticket. And basically, it was much like our own lottery, filled with all types of superstitious beliefs. People that played regularly would create all kinds of complex mathematical formulas to devise horoscopes, interpret dreams, check the relationship compatibility between romantic or business partners. And so it was originally brought here from Cuban immigrants, but it was brought to Cuba from the Chinese. So it had all of these sort of numerological and astrological dream interpretation influences. And so it was a big deal in the culture. It was a big part of early Tampa society that you played the Bolita, and it helped you make decisions in life. I know. So it was more than just games. It was more than just gambling. It was the single largest illegal money-making industry in Tampa's history. In 1927, there were over 300 Bolita parlors in the greater Tampa Bay area, playing games in conjunction with over 1,200 Bolita parlors that stretched from North Florida down to Cuba. In 1927, over $20 million was played that year alone on Bolita, and Charlie Wall had a monopoly of it all. So, if you'll follow me, this place is the Oaklawn Cemetery. So it's quite a walk. Basically, that little red straw coming out of the ground, that's Charlie Wall's grave. So he is buried here. And as we were walking over here, one of you asked me, oh, what did his parents think? And, well, that's perfect because we're about to talk about his young childhood. Basically, as I told you, Charlie Wall, he's basically the theme of our tour today. Everything revolved around him. He was a local hero in Ybor. He, walked around and handed out candy and gold coins to local children. Like I said, donated lots of money to churches. Back at Gaslight, I explained that he was the son of two very prominent Tampa families. He was born into a life of luxury and privilege. So what went wrong, right? What happened? Well, he had some issues as a youth. Mildly. Yeah, he had a troubled youth. Basically, when he was 13 years old, his mother died of yellow fever, who he adored. and his father married quite quickly thereafter, but unfortunately 2 years later he passed away, leaving him in the care of his stepmother, whom he hated with a vengeance. So much so that he shot her with a .22 caliber pistol. She was only wounded, but he was in juvenile detention for a short stint, and then he was shipped off to military school. He was kicked out of military school for visiting a brothel, and came back to Tampa and refused to go back, even if she would have him, to his stepmother. He had already sort of been in on the local scene in Ybor City, where they were doing some bolita games, some bolita gambling. He was a mathematical guru, and so it was amazing how quickly in his head he could calculate wagers and calculate the odds, and he had made some money that way. So he decided, instead of going back to his very prominent families and trying to find a regular mainstream job, he started working the gambling circuit. He started out as a runner, saved up some of his profits, and eventually started putting together some of his own bootleg liquor establishments. He was a unique individual in the gambling world because of his last name, because of his connections. He was able to go into places to sell bolita tickets that normal, petty criminals couldn't go. 5-star restaurants, country clubs, even City Hall. And so basically his family connections allowed him to move his way up in Tampa, in the illegal, underworld of criminal enterprises. He was, as I hope you have learned on the tour so far, uniquely placed in Tampa to take advantage of the immigrant community's need for a protector, and also to deal with Tampa business elites and political elites that probably wouldn't listen to someone that wasn't of their ilk. And so he was able to use connections from both low and high society to gain his kingdom, basically. On April 19th, 1965, Wall's wife comes home from a visit with her family to find him dead in their bedroom. Not just dead, really dead. Someone had gotten in and beaten his head in with a baseball bat and split his throat from ear to ear. There was so much blood on the clothing that he was wearing that the medical examiners didn't know what his wounds were, didn't know how he had died. And I'm sorry here. Don't worry, it's not that bad. I have pictures. I have a picture of Charlie Wall, a picture of the crime scene in his bedroom the night he was killed, and a picture of his shot-up car in a previous assassination attempt that he survived. One of the greatest mysteries of Tampa history is who killed Charlie Wall. Nobody really knows. Obviously, rival gangs such as the Traficantes certainly would have wanted him out of the way. There were plenty of people that were happy that he was gone. But nobody knows for sure. He was an elderly gentleman. He'd been in retirement for a long time, and so you would think that he wasn't a super influential man in the gambling world anymore. He certainly couldn't have taken over the way he had. So he wasn't an immediate rival for the Traficantes, who were the new lords of Tampa by that time period. It's also very strange. There was no sign of forced entry into the heavily fortified home. His body was found in the bedroom. There were no signs of dragging it there. So it's thought that he knew his killer and trusted him well enough to allow him into the house and to allow him into the bedroom. On the bedstand, inside a drawer, his .44 caliber revolver, a cannon of a gun, was left untouched. He never went for it. And so it's wondered who could have gotten close to him, who could have killed him. It's also thought that that it had something to do with his testimony to the Kefauver Crime Commission. Kefauver's book, Crime in America, which was a book that basically describes the findings of the commission and of Charlie Wall's testimony, was found on the dresser open. Nobody knows if he was reading it at the time or if the killer left it there as a sign that this was done in retribution for testimony. Another interesting mystery is what happened to all his money. Basically, when his estate was finally settled, it was found that all was worth $7,261.15. And so it's not known whether or not he totally, through his retirement, slid it away, all of his money, or if he managed to hide it so that the authorities couldn't steal it back from his loved ones. So it's a giant mystery as to what happened to him. Okay, we're done looking at that. Our next stop is just next door. It's the historic Central Avenue mural, and then that will be the final stop of the tour, and we'll let you sort of walk back toward Gaslight with us, but then whenever you need to go, if you need to go, you can.
Yeah, we can do that.
Underworld, brothels and gambling parlors were a dime a dozen in Ybor City. There were many in West Tampa. But in the downtown district, most of these types of illegal businesses were isolated to the scrub section of town. The scrub is no longer here. It was torn down for urban renewal and for the interstate. And so basically this Central Avenue mural, which celebrates and commemorates the historic Central Avenue African American business district and the civil rights movement, are the only thing that's left. So this is one of the few places that I can bring you to really talk about these businesses downtown. Jim Crow segregation pushed roughly 21,000 African Americans into about a 39-acre area. It was very poor, opening them to exploitation by criminal enterprises and by white politicians. By the 1920s, it resembled more of a ghetto with very small, simple wood-framed houses. Many lacked plumbing. Residents would burn their trash because they didn't have municipal waste collection. I do have a picture of the scrub section if you'd like to pass it around. But it was also a vibrant community. It was rough by middle-class standards, but it had its own church, St. James Episcopal, and a school. And it was understood that to the black people that lived there, it was home. But to visiting white people who would come here, especially at night, it was known that you were looking for illicit and illegal activity. And so basically, white middle-class patrons would come to a poor, rough neighborhood that they would ignore or avoid during the week for illicit activity, and that's what we call slumming. And slumming was something that a lot of people did in the 20s. It was popular in New York, it was popular in Chicago, it was also popular here in Tampa. And one of the places that they went was the scrub. Now the edge of the scrub that was Central Avenue was a thriving district of African American owned businesses and nightclubs. It had a rich musical heritage. It was known as the Harlem of the South. It was an important stop on the Chitlin Circuit, which traveled all down eastern seaboard, and it was known to have been a stop for national jazz musicians such as Ray Charles, James Brown, Cab Calloway, B.B. King, and Ella Fitzgerald. But the racial politics of the scrub section really opened into political and criminal exploitation. Lolita, blues, jazz, pool halls, prostitution. This is the place downtown where you would come if you wanted to see the illicit nightlife. The scrub was not huge. It was very poor. It was mostly black, and it was denied a lot of services by the community. Muggy Alley and 44 Quarters, which were neighborhoods just off of Central Avenue, were considered very, very dangerous. The Tenderloin, which is where ladies of ill repute would congregate, was a little further that way. And the first Tampa police officer... He wants to be on our tour, but he had to work today. The first Tampa police officer to be killed was killed in the scrub section. So it wasn't the kind of place that you would go unless you were looking for illegal activity or unless you lived here. The people who lived here were a vibrant community, and this mural commemorates the fact that despite racial segregation, despite heavy racism, that people could thrive in this environment, that people could own businesses. The scrub offers evidence that not all ethnic neighborhoods were treated equally in sort of this larger picture of the criminal underworld helping / exploiting various places in Tampa. They were given jobs and certain, money coming in and the ability to have businesses through some of the illegal activities that were taking place, but they weren't protected on the scale that a place like New York was. But this mural commemorates a really important part of Tampa's history and culture, and it's a testament to how people sought to survive and thrive in a racially oppressed environment. And so this is our last stop on the tour today. I really hope that you guys had a great time. I want to personally thank you for coming. This was my first time giving this tour, so I was don't forget, this is only one of 4 tours that the USF History Department is putting on in collaboration with the Digital Motion. So if you enjoyed yourself today and you want to come learn more about Tampa's rich cultural history, I would suggest that you come next week at the same time in the same place. We're going to be offering a tour of mid-century shopping on Franklin Street, which was a really important district, an important spot for Tampan history, and you'll hear all about it then.
And we're doing that one also at 5:30 p.m. and then with an optional dinner afterward if you want to have a more leisurely tour.